Good afternoon and welcome everyone. Welcome to Street Outreach Training series, fourth session in our kind of best practices in street outreach um, training series. And I'm Suzanne Wagner here with Lauren Peretti from Housing Innovations and Shannon Quinn to provide support to you guys as you do this important work. And want to recognize, and Andrea White, she'll give a wave too and recognize Molly Machado. And here we have Lauren has brought someone.
Ah, This
Her
is
baby.
Gracie, everybody. One of my babies.
Hi, Grace.
Anybody who wants to turn their camera on and show their pets, they're welcome to if you're lucky enough to have your pet with you today. Molly Machado from Demas is here. Molly, want to say hello?
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining today. I hope that this training is valuable, and I know it's going to be because I've already seen the slides. So appreciate everyone taking the time to join us today.
Thanks, Molly. It is a real feel-good training, and I'm happy to be doing it. I am a dog lover. So is Lauren, so is Shannon, so is Andrea. Really, everyone on our team are animal people. And oh, yeah, we got a picture. Thank you, D. Tyson. Cute, cute, cute.
Wait, I
Um,
have
uh,
a dog. Hold on, wait. I'm literally going downstairs so I can show you guys my dog.
okay. Well, while Rashida does that, I've already said Lauren and I will be facilitating today. The goals for this session are to hopefully give you information that's relevant. And we also have some more deeper goals that are specific to this session, but to really engage you, to get you to connect with each other, to connect with us, and to hopefully give information that's helpful right away. And I know Lauren really put together the lion's share of this PowerPoint, and there are a ton of resources. And frankly, the pets world is somewhat better resource, it seems at times, than the homeless services world now that we've gotten deeper and deeper into it. But we do have a lot of resources for you that can hopefully support your work with people with their pets. So that's also a goal for this session. So we love to see faces and we love to see pooches. Oh, Rashida, what's the dog's name? I love the hair.
This is Naya. She just got her hair done like 2 days ago. So that's a ponytail.
She looks cute. Hey,
My
Naya.
baby.
Yeah, baby. Okay, yes, we all call our animals our babies. So anyway, turn on your cameras, bring your animals, put your name as you'd like to be addressed. If you don't know how to do that to change your name, you could just hit the three buttons that are up at the corner of your name. If you run your cursor over that and rename yourself. And sometimes we've had people rename themselves funny things or superheroes or whatever. The slides will be up. I think they might be up already. We have about three polls and we have a couple of breakouts, but we really like this to be interactive and meaningful. So don't wait for those times. If you have something to say, raise your hand or put things in the chat. Just unmute, talking. You already know you're being recorded. Everything will be posted so you can watch it again or share it with staff who couldn't come today. This session is jam-packed, and we know that. There's a lot of slides here. It's the first time we're doing it, and it's a brand new training. So we, may get through everything, we may not. So some things may be for reference, and we'll see, if we need to make more sessions around pets, we're happy to do that because the trainings that we're providing support to outreach is an ongoing process. So we'll be continually each year adding new content. And if we need to make another session or whatever, we'll do it because that's how we are. We'll take care of it. So we've learned in this training that sometimes people don't have microphones on their laptops. So if you don't, when we have the breakout groups, you can't participate. So you can use the telephone to do that. So here's the information. I know Shannon, because she's on top of all this stuff, is also going to put it in the chat, but there's a phone number, meeting ID, and a passcode that you can use so that you can use your phone as your microphone and still look on your computer. You can see the slides and see the groups. So we have 25 people, which is still a lot of individual introductions to do, so we won't be able to do that. But we do like part of the goal, as we said, is for people to network. We like people to know who's here. So if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat your name, your agency, your role, title, location, like which can you're in, which city, The name of a pet you adore. Can be any, it doesn't have to be yours, could be somebody else's, and the kind of animal that is. And if you're not a pet person and you don't adore any pets, something else you find adorable. Because we like to start the session off by having a moment where we smile, take a deep breath, think about something nice and warm and fuzzy, like a pet. Although sometimes people have pets that are not fuzzy. And we incorporate all pets in our discussion of pets, including lizards. So, all right, what's coming up in the chat? Great. Okay. Pitbull Ghost. That's a good name. My kitty cat Simba. Chameleon. Okay, there's a reptile, right? I think chameleon's a reptile. Sister's chaotic cat. Birds, 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 birds. Birds are hard to have as pets, but you can, but birds are just amazing. Ah, okay. My cat, Waterbury. Okay, great. We have folks from all around the state. It's good to see who's here. Don't forget your a little bit of 411, even if you don't have a pet, just who you are and where you are. Okay, great. Can we have a lot of almost the whole state, it seems to me. Um, but again, the slides will be available for people. So I will say that this is my pet, Spencer, and I find him adorable. He's looking particularly handsome this day. He is a little bit of a ratty dog. He had just been groomed. But he makes me smile. So that's Spency. So what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to be talking about the human animal bond and kind of the nature of it, the value of it, the benefits of that, the meaning of it, and then talk about how we can support people who have pets in their families, right? And we're talking about animals as parts of people's families because they are. I mean, everybody, a few people said my baby, it is for anybody who has a pet, it is really part of a person's family. And when we're working with them, how do we support people who have animals with them, both as a worker and also as an agency. And as I said, there's a lot of resources, and we'll be doing sessions for supervisors, and we'll make sure we incorporate those resources into those sessions. But definitely, there's work to do on a programmatic level as well as our individual level to secure, especially resources and supports for staff. Talk a little bit about legal rights and accommodate and obligations of shelter obligations. What are people's rights? We'll talk about fair housing, reasonable, the ADA, and reasonable accommodations, and some closing comments. And then, of course, there's tons of resources at the end of the presentation. So we want to help in the training. Really, the focus is helping people keep their bonds intact. This is a part of the family. We're going to talk about the science, and the science shows animals are beneficial to people. People are usually beneficial to animals, but not as consistently as animals are beneficial to people. That's a fact, right? So how can we help people keep their animals with them, keep their bonds intact, help them get housing in spite of what can be a barrier, right? In terms of pet deposits or, buildings that don't allow animals. And then also help people if they have to make difficult decisions about their animals, which sometimes they may have to. And that can be like losing a family member, or like a family member being sick, or like having to separate from your child. It can be as traumatic as something like that. So we also, want to make sure we're kind of covering the basis of helping people keep their pets and also supporting them through the challenges of that. I mean, here's a quote that my pet is a part of my family. If you do not understand that, then you do not know me. And anybody who has a pet, I think this resonates for. If you don't have pets or you're not a pet lover, it's pretty much a fact. That people that's people how they feel about their animals. It used to be animals were, for work, for the herds, whatever. But for many people, it's really companionship and love, unconditional love, and lots of other really yummy, good things that come with pets. So just a quick poll to get a sense, if we're out west in California, the number of people who live outside who have pets is like 105%. It's so common, but let's, just get a sense of how many people, how many of you currently have, sorry, it's a hard sentence to read, people on your caseload who have pets with them. So it's a yes or no question. Maybe if it's a no, maybe you did in the past. And then there's always the other. You can just put that in the chat. Okay. Give it a few seconds. It's a quick poll. While you're polling, and I give it a couple more seconds. Sarah, do you want to raise your hand? Sarah Zeiderveen, I forgot to mention she's part of our team, Housing Innovation Support. Okay, we have about 15. So I'm going to end the poll there. Okay, so 2/3 of, let me share the results. 2/3 of people have, wow, people on their caseload with pets. Okay, so that's 10 of you for sure. So that's a lot. It's enough. And about a third say no, not yet. Okay. Um, not that I think pets are really beneficial, but it is a real challenge both to live outside when you have a pet and to get housing when you have a pet. Um, So in a way, I'm kind of glad we're not in California where it's so much everyone. But it's still really important to meet those needs. Okay. So I think I'm going to turn it over now to Lauren. We're going to watch a quick video of somebody talk a little bit about their animals.
Hi, everybody. We're going to take a few minutes now to hear directly from a young person. Her name is Judy, and she's living on the street. And she's going to tell us a bit about her family and about what they mean to her. It's a real short video, and I know I find it incredibly touching and inspiring, and I hope that you do too. So here we go.
My name is Judy. I live in West LA, under a bridge, in a tent. This is my lovely fiance, Christopher. This is Anastasia. This is Melody, and this is Roxy. I became homeless when I was 16 because my mom was in an abusive relationship, and I couldn't take it no more. I got Melody through a newspaper. The couple got pit bulls for a living. I saved her when she was 6 weeks old, and I had her ever since then. So she acts like a big baby. Anastasia, I picked her up from a lady that didn't want her, and she said to come get her or I'm gonna put her out on the streets. And I got her for free. The gentleman that had Roxy, he didn't want her because she was blind. And I felt like every animal, blind, handicapped, disabled, or whatever, deserves a life. And 4 days later, I took her to the vet and found out she's born blind. No matter what, I still love her. If I didn't have them, I don't know where I could be right now. Anastasia and Melody are both service animals. Anastasia is my service animal because she lets me know when someone's coming too close. Sometimes she could tell when I'm having a panic attack. Melody, she naturally can tell when I have a panic attack, and when I have one, or when I'm getting ready to have one, she lays next to me. If they lick my face, I'll wake up and I'll realize what's going on. If they don't, sometimes I'll just have one and I'll be in my own world for a good 5 minutes to an hour. Anywhere downtown, I didn't have no services. They always denied me. They said my mental disability wasn't what they're looking for, and I believe that physical or mentally is still a disability. To make it easier for people that have animals, they gotta understand that animals just like a child. I do have a plan to get Section 8, and I do have an apartment coming up. Anastasia and Melody are both allowed to come with me because they're service animals. Roxy, I'm gonna talk to the lady and see if she could come. If not, I'm gonna sneak her in. if you live on the streets, why do you have a dog? You can't even take care of yourself. But it's kind of funny to me because a lot of the vets trip out because they're healthy being on the streets and they're always taken care of. When I have them, I'm a better person, and when I didn't have no animals, I didn't have to worry about nothing, no responsibilities, and I didn't like that. I like to care about things. I'm 5 months pregnant, and it's gonna hurt to go back home to deliver the baby. I really don't want to leave them behind, but I have to. I'll be staying at my mother's house for a little bit. Whenever my fiance gets an apartment or something, then I'll be coming back up here with the baby. I don't want to bring a child to the streets because I know if I bring the child to the streets, CPS will get custody of it. I just want to own a big house one day and just rescue all these animals that's loose and been abused and have a bad past.
So, so I don't know.
I'll pull
I
up the
absolutely,
slides. Yeah, sorry,
thank
go
you,
ahead.
Suzanne. I absolutely love this story. I think, Judy's dogs clearly desperately needed someone to love and care for them, and she stepped up for them, right? And she's great at being their mom. And I think for me in the video, you can really see how proud she is of that. And it seems like something that she feels very confident about her ability to be a great mom to her dogs, and that there might not be a lot of other things that Judy has that kind of confidence about. And when you watch the video, you see how incredibly happy the dogs are, right? They're well cared for, they have on their cute little coats, they're playing with each other, and they just are loving their life with their pack. And so when I watch this video, I see a family that needs each other, right? And I see unconditional love that goes both ways, that was transformative, both for the humans and for the animals in the family. So, we're tight on time. I'm going to keep going, but we would love to see if you guys have any reactions, things you want to say or share about this video. Please put that in the chat for us. So you can go to the next slide, Suzanne. So just like Judy's family, every family has their own story. So sometimes people had their pets before they lost their housing, and they've been accompanied on that journey into homelessness and through homelessness the entire time by their pets. Other times, people like Judy talks about in the video for short periods of time, or unfortunately sometimes permanently, have had to relinquish custody of their pets to other people. And sometimes people meet their pets for the first time when they're already homeless, excuse me. And I think that last scenario can be particularly hard sometimes, particularly for people maybe who aren't pet people, to understand, right? We might think, oh gosh, why would you do that? This is going to make it so much harder for you to get a place to live. And it's really just critical for us to understand the bonds that someone has with their pets through their own personal lens, right? And as we get to know them, to really include in that process of getting to know them, getting to know about their pets and about what those pets mean to them personally, so that we can understand that motivation for them to stay together. And again, every family is going to have their own story. But some of the reasons that we commonly hear, and you all probably commonly hear, that people are really just insistent about not separating from their pets include, like we saw with Judy, right? Those dogs are her babies, they're her family. And being a caregiver to them is maybe the most important role that she has in her life, right? It's something that she's proud of, that she gets up every day and probably organizes a lot of her day around. So, and they provide her with companionship, with support and love. And those things are so important as our clients cope with whatever stressors they're dealing with, like the stress of being homelessness and just having to survive day to day, the stigma that people encounter because of their homelessness, the stress of a disability, maybe an addiction, right? The love and support that animals provide really help people get through these incredibly challenging times. And also, we know that people who are experiencing homelessness face a lot of risks to their safety, right? And people often have been traumatized in their past. And so they have a hard time feeling safe. And so having an animal with them, whether it's a big dog, like one of the dogs we saw in the video was looked to be some kind of pit mix, or a little dog, right? Those or any other kind of animal, those animals can really help the person to feel safe by alerting when somebody comes near, and just by being at their side all of the time. And that's so important for everyone, and particularly for anyone that's ever been traumatized. And then we also know anybody that is an animal lover, right, has animals, knows that those animals can often be a starting point for conversations, right? You're out and about in town with your dog or your cat or whatever, your bird, and that animal can be a conversation starter and can help people really make friends and build community. And then, your animals don't care whether or not you have a house, right? They don't care how much money you have or, whether you have nice things. And in some cases, they may be the only relationship that you have in your life that is completely non-judgmental and just offers 100% unconditional love, no matter what. And then finally, and this is really important, and I think sometimes something that people don't appreciate, right? People often think, well, why not just place the animal in a shelter? And the sad reality is in this country, that there simply are not enough resources to manage all animals that don't have someone to care for them, right? So there are about 1 million shelter animals that are euthanized annually in the US. So placing your animal into a shelter is certainly not, even if someone was willing, is not a panacea at all. Next slide, Suzanne.
I just want to say, if
Yeah.
people wanted to put anything, other reasons that they've
Oh,
experienced into
thanks.
the chat, it's okay. Of reasons people won't give up their animals and or the experiences they've had with that would be great. As we said, this is a new training, so we want to keep building it, and we want to build it based on what your guys are experiencing out there in the field.
So these are some things we commonly hear people say when there are folks experiencing homelessness with their pets. And we wanted to spend a few minutes unpacking these ideas. So one thing you'll often hear people say is people experiencing homelessness are unable to take care of an animal. And we know, like we could see that in the video that we just watched with Judy, and I'm sure you see this with people on your caseloads, that often the animals are extremely well loved and very well cared for. And again, having that responsibility to take care of an animal can really provide somebody with a super important role. They've got to get up every day and make sure that animal is fed, walked, loved on, right? And those responsibilities create an important structure for people around which to organize their day and help them to feel needed and loved. And can also really help people to take care of themselves, right? Being around and healthy and able to take care of an animal can really be motivation for taking care of yourself. Another thing we commonly hear people say is, oh, I feel sorry for the animal. And I think it's important for us to remember, right, that I have certainly seen people experiencing homelessness show, a tremendous amount of commitment and loyalty to their pets, more so than people that I know who are housed. And you see people who stay on the streets all the time, right? That because of their animals. And a lot of times, many of us, right, have to go to work every day. We have to leave our house and go to work every day and leave our animals behind. Or we have, other things that we're doing where we're not able to spend as much time with our animals as we'd like. And the fact is that folks who are experiencing homelessness, not always, but often are spending more time with their animals than folks that are housed are. And I know for me, like the most important thing I feel like in my dog's life is being able to spend time with their people, right? That's what really the key thing that makes an animal happy. So, and then finally, you hear often that the animal would be better off in rescue, and similar to the statistic we looked at on the previous slide, right? There are over 6 million companion animals that enter shelters annually, and there simply are not enough resources to deal with that, right? Shelters already have their hands more than full trying to manage the animals that are in their shelters. So keeping pets together with people who have, if a pet has somebody who loves them, right, keeping that pet together with that person is not only good for the person, it's also good for the pet. And I think also along this vein, you'll hear, well, this person can't afford a pet. A pet is expensive, and anybody that's a pet owner knows that is true. The food's expensive, the veterinary care is astronomical. And the reality is that many people, right, struggle to financially take care of pets. So that's not a circumstance that's unique to people experiencing homelessness. And if we limited pet ownership only to people that can afford veterinary care, there'd be many, many millions more pets that would be euthanized every year in America, right? So rather than removing pets from people who love them, we're going to talk today about resources and strategies we can use to help people keep their families intact, so that we don't have to send more animals into shelter. All right, next slide. So families come in all shapes and sizes, right? Who we identify as part of our family is a totally personal choice, right? I don't have the right to tell you who is part of your family. And we would never say to someone, "Oh, that child isn't part of your family because they're not blood related, right? They're a stepchild or whatever." We would never say that, right? And so our clients are the experts in their own lives, and they know who is most important to them. And sometimes it's an animal, it's a pet, that's the most important relationship that they have in their lives. And so our job, and what we're going to really talk about today, is to help people who don't have a place to live to find a place that works for their entire family as they choose to define their family, even if that choice doesn't entirely make sense to you, right? Even if you think they'd be better off making a different choice, just accepting that choice as a matter of fact without judgment and moving forward in accordance with that choice. And I know that that's really hard to do sometimes. And so we're gonna talk today about how hard that is, and about, again, some strategies and resources that can make it a little easier.
I also just want to add something that I just heard some research about actually today, from a different study, but relating to how people define their homelessness. And in fact, even though people had been homeless before, meaning they didn't have a place to live, it was when they lost connection to their friends and family that they officially felt like they were really homeless. And so, just in the same vein of thinking about animals a part of the family, is that reconnecting with some family as defined by that person is part of the experience of feeling like you're getting home again too. So I think that's also sometimes can be an incremental step for people who really don't have any human relationships, that an animal can be an easier entree into a relationship and support because of the unconditional love, because of, a variety of things that we'll talk more about. But that may be opening up that person again to connection, which they've been shut off from through their whatever caused their homelessness or the circumstances of it.
Thanks, Suzanne. So obviously there are real downsides, right, to trying to look for housing with a pet. If you've ever had a pet and been out on the rental market trying to look for a place, that it severely limits your housing options. And we saw from the poll, many of you are currently trying to find, working with people who and I'm sure struggling to try and find housing that will accept those pets. But we don't want to focus just on the downsides, right? There are also huge benefits to pet ownership. So, I know for me, there's absolutely nothing that makes me forget a bad day more quickly than coming home to wiggly dog butts, right? My dogs are all over me. They're so happy to see me. And for me, during the most difficult times in my life, right, that unconditional love that I get from my dogs is absolutely everything. And I think that same thing is true for our clients. And that feeling that any of us that love pets are familiar with, right? That's backed by scientific evidence. So there's a link here on your slide. You can check it out when you have a chance. But there's real science that shows that pets improve people's lives mentally, physically, and socially, right? So we know that pets can be important to helping improve people's heart health, right? There's evidence to show that they alleviate depression and that they're just overall good for people's well-being. We'll talk more later about assistance animals and all of the many concrete ways in which animals can provide specific assistance to alleviate symptoms of a disability or, some sort of health condition. And there's also, there's documented benefits, even as specific things like decreasing blood pressure, reducing anxiety, right? So yes, it's hard for people on the streets to find housing with a pet, but there are also all of these other benefits that are important for us as we're talking to people about the pros and the cons and the options that they have, to not discount all of these things that folks are getting from that relationship with their pet. So we're going to do a quick poll here. I think Suzanne's going to launch our poll for us. So what benefits from a relationship with an animal have you experienced yourself, or have you seen someone that you love experience through a relationship with an animal? And we'll give you a few minutes to complete the poll.
Choices on the poll, just so I know, sometimes depending on your screen, it could be easier or harder to see. You can pick all that you want. Is improved mental health, companionship, feeling loved, feeling needed, feeling safer, feeling less stigma. Scroll myself, make friends, increase exercise, get disability support, or other. Zoom only allows 10 choices, so we had to use the 10th for other because there are many, many benefits we could keep listing that people get from their pets, and certainly we've seen. Okay, I think we have you guys are quick on this poll. I'll give another second or two in case anybody wants to. I think we're good. 19. All right. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So the big winners here. Go ahead. Oh, you want to do it, Lauren? Sorry, I'm so used to just jumping in. Go ahead.
Either way, yeah, sure, I'll do it. So, all of these things, right? There's not one thing here on this list that someone hasn't experienced themselves or seen in someone that they love. So the top things that people noted are feeling loved. I noticed that was the first thing that people voted for. That started to tick up first. Feeling loved, right? Companionship, feeling needed, so important for people who may have lost many other important roles in their life, to have a responsibility and a relationship with someone else that needs them. That is so important. Improving mental health, that's a big one. Meeting people and making friends, increasing exercise. I know I personally get a lot more exercise because I have 3 dogs than I would otherwise. And so I don't know and then we invited people that picked others to put things in the chat. And I see Ibis shared also helping with stress. Big one, huge one for people. So so clearly, I think you guys, we don't have to tell you guys, you are seeing this already in your own lives and in the lives of the client and of your clients, all of these benefits. We can go on to the next slide, Suzanne. So sometimes we hear from folks things like, we're a human service agency, right? We're not an animal welfare agency. And that's right, absolutely, right? The organizations that each of you work for are human service organizations. And we know that you guys have a ton on your plates. And no one expects you to become experts in animal behavior. No one expects you to become experts in animal health or animal welfare. At the same time, right, it's important for us to remember that providing good care for our clients that have pets means approaching the needs of their families holistically, right? So just like we do for the humans, all the humans in the family, we want to be providing resources and support around pet care that is essential to our clients, right? The same way that caring for their children is essential, right? We've got to keep in mind that the animals are part of people's families, and in order to thrive and succeed, we've got to be able to help them to care for everyone in their family, including the pets. So we know that if our animals feel unsafe or are sick, that it's going to have a huge impact on their humans' emotional and even physical health. Right? So having resources to be able to help people who are struggling to afford to buy pet food, being able to struggle to provide preventative pet care, veterinary care, particularly if they have a sick pet. I'm sure you guys have seen that. That's a huge stressor for people. And having resources to be able to do those things is key. So I want to shout out for a minute to Bobby Joe Evans, who is on the webinar with us today and is a longtime animal welfare as well as people welfare advocate in the state of Connecticut. She helped us to pull together the resources that are linked here on this slide. So thank you, Bobby Joe. And there are resources out there, right, to help low-income folks to care for their pets. So when you have a chance, open up this document. You'll see their food pantries listed that either are specifically providing pet care only or pet food only, or that have pet food as part of their offerings. There are links to low-cost vaccination and spay and neuter clinics. There are a couple search engines where you can put in what you're looking for and where you're located, and it'll give you, resources in your area for low-cost veterinary care and supplies. There are resources for financial aid if people have veterinary cost expenses that they can't afford. And then there are also financing options, right? So there's credit that people can get to help pay for. That might not be an option for all of our folks because of credit history. Now, it's also, I think, really important to acknowledge that, there are a lot of resources on that list, but there, as with most of the things that you're working to help your clients to connect to, there are typically more people out there who need this help than there are resources available. So by no means is this a panacea. We also know that you guys are amazing at helping your folks to navigate and tap resources that are scarce. So please check out the link and see what's out there. and help your clients when when they're facing not being able to feed their pets or not being able to afford veterinary care. Make sure you've looked at all of these things and explored what help is out there, because again, helping people to care for their pets is an essential part of caring for people. And we know that clients will sometimes put their own lives at risk. I'm sure you guys have seen that working with unsheltered folks. Well, they'll stay outside in terrible conditions if they can't, before they'll separate from their pets. And again, we know that the worry and the stress associated with not being able to provide the care that pets needs is extremely distressing for our clients. And then lastly, just to be aware that when people do have to make really rough decisions around surrendering a pet, or they lose a pet, pet passes away or maybe goes missing, that can be, as Suzanne was saying, as devastating for people as losing another human member of their family, and can really put people at serious risk of self-harm, and put people into some have people experience very deep grief around those things. And so important that you're mindful of that as you're working with people, and really stepping up supports when somebody experiences some sort of loss or trauma with their animals, and doing good suicide prevention work around those circumstances. All right, next slide. So we don't want to spend all of our time talking at you guys. These sessions are an opportunity for you guys to talk with each other and share resources and information and challenges and successes. Okay, so we'll go ahead. We hope that you guys had some good discussions and got to meet folks that maybe you haven't met before. Wanted to give a chance if there's anything that came up in your small group discussions that you want to share here with the big group. Please feel free to unmute yourselves and share that, or put comments in the chat, anything you want to share. We'll give a minute to see if anybody wants to do that.
I can talk a little bit about one of the things that we talked about. The biggest thing we talked about is the boarding, the short-term boarding that's desperately needed, not just so somebody can go into shelter, but so somebody can go detox, even for like a 7 day. And that's the one thing that's also difficult to fund, because not only does the pet need to have regular vaccinations, but they'll need additional vaccinations, like dogs would need kennel cough and maybe some others. They might need to be heartworm tested, which is additional costs for, somebody. But you need the boarding costs could exceed $65, $75 a night. And you're looking at 2-3 weeks sometimes. It's an arm and a leg, or a tail and a paw, really, to put a pun in there. But it's something that we keep working on. For my nonprofit, we keep working on trying to get grants, and people don't see the need. They look at it and they literally say, well, there's really not a need to justify giving a grant for that, when we statistically show them there is a need, that people
Are you
are
able
not
to
going.
use? Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm just curious, Bobby, because when we've been participating in My Dog is My Home's network and
Mhm.
things like that, are you able to use any fostering
So the
through?
foster, it's hard with fosters too, because we don't know if the animals get along with other animals, and a lot of our fosters have other animals. Like my
Yeah.
house is filled with cats and 2 dogs. So,
Mhm.
do they get along with other animals? If the person says yes, and we do a temperament test, then we find out, well, it was not a yes. It's a definite no. They don't like other animals. And then that causes even more stress on their animal to suddenly be thrust into a home with other dogs and cats that they don't have a clue about. So it's a toss up, and we have, we were talking to somebody. I was talking to somebody who they have a different breed. It's a large dog, so maybe breed specific. So it's so difficult because, and we have we've experienced somebody who has an older dog. Nobody wants to help foster this older dog. She's 15, and nobody wants to touch her because they're afraid she's going to die on their watch, which could happen. And nobody wants to even board her for us because, again, nobody wants that responsibility. So there's so many different barriers. And I think the boarding is the biggest one right now, and not take away, does the person want to actually separate from their animal? If we could have a process where they could go every day, visit, and know their animal's safe. But for short term, for somebody to just get clean and sober and get their health, go in the hospital and get surgery where they, for their medical needs, that's, I think, a huge barrier right now.
So I
So,
think, as Bobby Joe's pointing out, there's certainly a lot of challenges and a lot of barriers. But we do encourage, I know the folks at My Dog is My Home have definitely found some success with local fosters. And so there are fosters, organizations in every community, right? Check out those resources that are on that list that we provided. You may be able to find either some financial assistance or a local animal welfare organization that can help in these super challenging circumstances that Bobby Joe is describing. Is there anyone else that wants to say something quick before we? All right. Suzanne, you
So
want to?
thanks for, yeah, I'm gonna, before I just want to like kind of tie a knot from here to there because they think, thank you, Bobby Joe, like it shows, the depth of the work that you're doing, and how much you've thought about this issue. And I know that there are people in the room who've done a lot of work on this and are thinking a lot about it. And I think the resources piece and really creating resources that your agency has made relationships with so that as these needs emerge, obviously, I know Bobby Joe, at your agency, you've got a lot of connections, but if your agency is just new to kind of being pet friendly, really check out those resources and make a relationship with your local humane society or animal welfare organization. Go over, introduce yourself. Don't wait till you have a person who's in need and you're kind of desperate for a resource. But I have been shocked personally by some amazing resources in the animal world. As I said at the beginning, sometimes better resources than we have for homeless folks, depending on, and certainly in some parts of the country, the animal welfare resources are far superior to homeless resources, not so much in the Northeast. So I think, we're just talking about this list of worker role, and a lot of it is kind of obvious, I think, and it's just the way that you all practice. So I'm going to run through it quickly because we want to have time to talk about kind of reasonable accommodation and emotional support animals. And we're going to make a handout, a tool of like worker role, because it can be overwhelming. You get a new client and they open their tent door and you finally engage with this person and you've been going out and they're inside the tent you never saw. There's a dog or a cat or an animal that's their pet. And so you're like, kind of, wow, now what? So what's my role there? And I think just really having a good sense that, as Lauren said earlier, that we see the pet as part of the family, that we care about that animal, that we are, helping them and their family as we see it, their family, that we're trying to think about what does this tell us about the person? How are they taking care of their animal? As mentioned, they often will take better care of their animal than themselves. Um, and incorporate that information into our planning with people and to our assessments. It is a good sign that people can take care of an animal, even if they care more for the animal than themselves. Because once they have more resources, they'll care for the animal and better for themselves, right? So that's the hope that goes on there. I mean, I think it could be, you could say, well, why would you feed your dog if you're barely eating? Well, for that person, that dog is their lifeline, right? So it's a complicated issue, but we want to really approach it from this strength-based lens. We want to make sure people have access to all the resources. Like I said, there's a lot of resources out there. Ask your supervisor if you don't, know what resources are out there. Again, I think agency connections are really important. Um, you know, Compassion is going to be needed because things are going to happen. Like you can't take your dog in rehab, like Bobby Joe was just talking about. So you finally decide you want to get sober. Your animal's one of your main supports, but you're not going to take your dog into rehab probably. That's probably not going to happen. Or it's going to be really hard to find housing that accommodates pets, especially if it's not a reasonable accommodation. So we want to make sure we have compassion for people, that there are resources and that we're not gatekeeping these resources. That's just the way the world is. We want to do a lot of advocacy. We want to make sure also that people have a care plan for emergencies. Like, what if they do get sick? What if they do put off the surgery, but then they need emergency care, right? And they end up in the hospital in emergency. Who's going to take care of their animal? The state of Connecticut has, of course, good protections for animals, and there are cruelty laws that are linked here. So take a look at those. Um, be mindful, I guess, I think, of our own biases about what adequate care is. Not everybody lets their dog sleep in their bed, like Cody, right? So that's my standard. And I'm sure some people would judge me for that, and that's fine. I'm okay. I'm okay taking that. But just because people treat their animal differently, if they're not harming the animal's well fed and nourished and taken care of, they may have different standards from us. Some people's dogs sleep outside. Other people would be mortified by that, as long as the animal's health is not in jeopardy, right? So we have to be aware about different privilege, different level of culture, and how that might affect our view of the animal. We also want to help people, just like we talked about the harm reduction plan previously, about what are their options for having a pet. Is there an option to go into a shelter with your animal? We'll talk a little bit about that later. If not, what's not negotiable? What's not negotiable? Are you unwilling would you foster your animal if it meant you could go into shelter and then reunite when you had housing, for example, right? So you want to help people think these things through, not really judge what they do, right? Some people might say, no, there's no way I can separate. I cannot put my dog in foster care while I'm looking for housing. That's not going to work. Right. So we are going to be dealing with people have different decisions they're going to make about their animals, just like people make decisions about their children. I think that can be similarly complicated and maybe is a good model where I've seen households where families put their older kids in care with grandma or their younger kids in care with grandma, and because they don't want to bring them into the shelter, but they all want to live together, right? It's a similar analogy that people do things to protect their family. And we want to be helping people consider their options that are safe in a non-judgmental way, even though it can be complicated at times. Um, Moving inside. So if an animal has always lived outside in a tent, just like a person who's lived in a tent for a long time, there's going to be some adjustments to coming inside. So we want to help the person plan for that, prepare for that, making that transition. If it's an outdoor animal, is it going to be easy to get the animal out? Is there a pet park nearby? What are the resources for that? Have you always let the dog loose and now you have to keep the dog leashed, right? Because that's the rules where you are now and you've been living in the woods alone, so it's been a different thing. All these are examples. I'm trying to talk very fast, but what is the life like now and what is life going to be like inside, and helping people make a plan. Again, really being mindful that if people are deal with any loss of their animals, that can be as sad as losing a family member or maybe sadder. And we want to link to grief and bereavement resources for people. A lot of people love pets. I think so. There are good resources for pet support. And more and more, just like everything, because after COVID, there's more available online. There's online resources as well, not that so people don't have to kind of go somewhere. And then sometimes people have to make difficult decisions. It might be that an animal is so sick that it can't be cured, right? And do I put this pet down? Do I let the animal suffer? Right? People have to make difficult decisions. So we want to provide support around that. And we want the agencies and your agencies, and again, we'll reinforce this and go over this when we talk about in the supervisor session about just like having resources for people, like mental health resources, like food pantry, like places to get medical care. We want to have partnerships with organizations that can provide resources for people and their pets. And there are, again, resources for food, vet care, spay and neuter, vaccination, boarding. There's a long list of things that people could need. But there are, again, depending on your town. So Connecticut, this is statewide. So it's going to vary across the state. I don't know all the specific resources in Connecticut, but most of Connecticut varies across the state. So my guess is what's local is local. So you want to make sure you're connecting with your local resources. And the animal welfare resources people, they don't want any more animals brought up for adoption. They don't want more pets in the system. So they want to help you navigate. And they often are a great resource, your local animal control or animal support unit. You want to think about staff. If you know you have somebody who has a pet, are you putting them with someone who really thinks homeless people shouldn't have pets? Like Lauren talked about that. Sometimes people think about that. I think about the there was an LA vet who was in the Time 100's most influential people list, and he was like, well, homeless people don't deserve to have pets because they're homeless, right? And that was his initial thinking. He obviously changed his mind. But if that's how if your person thinks, you probably don't want to make an assignment that way. And also just like benefits or mental health or substance use resources, this is a specialty. And someone on your team may be the animal welfare whisperer and want to become the in-house expert and kind of be the resource, where people know, okay, I have a question, I can go to Lauren. She's the real resource on our team, kind of as expert or a specialist for what to do. And then also making sure that people get training, staff need training. I've personally been to a number of presentations by organizations that done a lot of work on bringing pets into their organizations, people living with their pets, sheltering pets. Lots and lots of shelters are really struggling with being pet friendly, not just ADA compliant, but really being pet friendly. And it's really number one thing they all talk about is having staff have the training to do the work. That's number one thing is knowing how, understanding animal behavior, understanding how to interact with animals, and not only training the staff, but training the other people, especially if it's a congregate setting, right? I know some of you do run shelters, so that's why I'm taking a moment to make a commercial, because you also want to do education for the other people in the program, if people are going to be living together with other people's animals. Include guidance on interaction in your safety protocols. And here, Urban Resource Institute, that's based in New York, has co-sheltered 900 pets with 0 bites. They're, a great cheerleader. Their website has a lot of resources. There is, of course, occasionally, just like there are people with their children, sometimes, there's cruelty or abuse and neglect that's going on, right? So make sure you have a protocol around that. Willful abuse is very rare from this study. I think we know that, but we still need to be prepared, right? And if that's going on, make sure that animal's safe. We want to also make sure staff have support around the complex decisions that people have to make, right? So there's a lot of issues around pets. It is a clinical issue, it could be a legal issue. There may be ethical issues involved. Is the person really properly caring for the pet? And then, also how do we manage fostering or sheltering or boarding, right? Like, so free boarding, so somebody could go into detox, like Bobby Joe was just talking about, that could be, can we negotiate that? Can we make that happen? So it's very complex, but you also, and then finally is just advocating for animal friendly shelter and housing options. I will tell you, because we work nationally, like in the city of Los Angeles, I don't know that this was smart. I'm just going to tell you what they did, which was they mandated that all shelters allow animals immediately. This was a few years ago. So some people were good doobies and they immediately just started taking in animals. Other people are like, wait a minute, we got a plan for this. Um, but they really did need to do planning on it. And it wasn't really great to just flip from no animals to everybody has an animal without doing some thinking about it. So we want to advocate for it, but it also is something that takes some work to put together a program. And again, just want to direct you to the resources, direct you to My Dog is My Home, which is a great organization. And I think they're in the slides at the end. They have lots of you can tour shelters, they have lots of resources to being animal friendly, and they're doing a lot of work on documenting how programs are becoming animal friendly and doing that in a way that's safe for all the participants and the pets. So, a couple things just on the obligations. So, any shelter that of shelters and talking about shelters and pets, and we're kind of moving into talking about the ADA and the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act. Um, but any shelter that's accepting federal funds is current, these are the rules, they're still the rules, no matter the rules are changing every day. The Fair Housing Act and the ADA still exist, and a shelter that accepts federal funding, even if it's passed through the state, like ESG funding or locality, you have to comply with the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities, and the Fair Housing Act. And the ADA requires that guide or service animals, service dogs are allowed entry into public buildings and public access. So there's a ton of resources on the left, pet friendly shelters, low barrier shelter, how to become pet friendly. As I mentioned, this is all a lot of the work from My Dog is My Home, and then co-sheltering people and their companion animals, a report. So, and under the Fair Housing Act, people with disabilities can request a reasonable accommodation in a shelter or in housing. So it doesn't just apply to housing. And I think that's an important distinction. A lot of people at first thought, oh, the Fair Housing Act only applies to housing. Many, many lawyers have weighed in on this, that people can request accommodations for being in a shelter that's funded with federal funds for assistance animals and support, emotional support animals. And momentarily, Lauren's going to go into some of the details of it. It's a little complex, um, actually, like a lot complex, but hopefully it will be helpful to talk through some of that. Now, in DOH, rebid the system of homeless system this last year and created a whole lot of standards that are consistent across programs. I think standards that people agree with for the most part. But they did add some things around pets, and as an initial kind of let's make some movement on this, requiring shelters to admit people with service animals. So, in other words, that's really following the law, because that's a requirement under ADA and fair housing that shelter service animals be accommodated, but also make every effort to accommodate non-service animals, right? And that's really acknowledging that it's not just a simple like, okay, everybody bring their pet in and we'll figure it out later, and be like a big Noah's Ark or something. It's not going to work. So, there also is a requirement around the cans, really taking a look at this and creating a plan in your can. So as outreach teams, you're hopefully participating in your can, you're going to can meetings. If you have people with pets, you're raising that as an issue. If people need housing, you have people with pets. But the cans are expected to implement a plan to accommodate households with pets, emotional support, and service animals in shelter. So already service animals are required, and Lauren's going to go into that. But there is an expectation that shelters are starting to work on this, because very often that is indeed what keeps a person out of shelter, is that they will not leave their animal behind. Okay, I know I kind of breezed through that, but now Lauren's going to pick up on this service animal, assistance animal, or a pet question.
So, as Suzanne mentioned, this is pretty complicated, and there's a lot of confusion about people's rights pertaining to assistance animals. And so, this is a resource. It's small here on the slide, but it's linked on the right in the underlined green text. You can open up this entire document. It's actually a 2-page document. We only have 1 page here on the slide. And hopefully, it's helpful to clarify what are the differences between these categories, right? What's a service animal, what's an assistance animal, and what's a pet. Like I said, this is complicated. We're going to go through it as much as we can. We'll answer as many questions as we can. I'm not an attorney. I might not know all the answers to all of your questions. But if you've got questions that we can't answer today, either because we run out of time or I just don't know the answer, we will get back to you with those answers. And always feel free to reach out to folks on our team with those questions. Our slides are at the end of the deck today. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about what the guidance is from HUD on these different kinds of animals and what rights people have to bring these animals into their housing. but know that the guidance from HUD is very general, right? So all of this, the actual decisions happen on a very case by case basis. So, so the first category we're going to talk about is service animals, and by definition, generally a service animal is a dog, although there are some stipulations in the law that enable people also to have a mini horse as a service animal. So unless it's either a dog or a mini horse, it is not a service animal. There's no other kinds of animals that can qualify as a service animal. And what
I
distinguishes
wonder if anyone has a mini horse. I'm just quick poll. No? Seen that one yet? Okay. Phew. That's all I
so the key thing so these are almost always going to be dogs, right? And the key thing that distinguishes a service animal from an assistance animal is that a service animal is trained to perform a specific task or maybe more than one tasks for someone who has a disability. So they have to be trained, and they have to be trained to do a specific thing. So common examples are that you guys are probably familiar with, right? A seeing eye dog, right? That's a service dog, right? Maybe a very big dog like a Great Dane that is trained to help someone with Parkinson's to be more stable when they walk. Or an animal that's trained to alert somebody that has a hearing disability to a doorbell or a phone, or an animal that's trained to alert someone with a seizure disorder that they're about to have a seizure, right? So again, specialized training, almost always a dog. And service animals are protected both by the ADA and the Fair Housing Act, and they've got to be permitted in almost every public place. So generally speaking, any public place where a client is going, if they have a trained service animal, they're going to be able to take that animal. They should be able, under the law, they're legally entitled to take that animal into that public place. So that includes stores, restaurants, grocery stores, right? If they have a job and they're going to work, they should be able to take that animal to work. Their housing, shelter, as Suzanne said, doctor's offices and other kinds of healthcare settings. So there are going to be very few exceptions to this. I think the classic example of an exception is you're not going to be able to take your service dog into the operating room with you. That's a sterile environment, and there are health and safety exceptions in cases like that. But generally, any place the client is they're going to be able to take service animals. It's going to be rare, probably, that you have people that have service animals, right? Mostly what you're going to encounter is what this document, and this, I don't know if I said this already, but this is my dog is my home document, and they use the word assistance animal. So that's the second category here in kind of the teal color, to really be used interchangeably with support animals. And that can be confusing because different entities use this language differently. So sometimes, in the HUD guidance, right, an assistance animal is an umbrella term, right, that includes both service animals and support animals. But here, my dog is my home is using assistance animals interchangeably with support animals. So what qualifies as an assistance animal is different than a service animal. So an assistance animal can be any type of common household pet, right? So including a dog, also a cat, a bird, a rodent, a reptile, snakes, fish, any kind of common household pet that alleviates a symptom or effect of a disability. But unlike a service animal, it doesn't have to be trained to perform a specific task, right? So an assistance animal can include an emotional support animal, but it doesn't necessarily have to be emotional support, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a behavioral health disability. It could be an aid for any kind of disability. So some common examples of an assistance animal might be a cat, right? That helps somebody, that alleviates someone's symptoms of PTSD, right? Or a bunny that helps somebody to cope with their cancer. And so what's different in terms of assistance animals, in terms of the rights people have, where they can go with that animal, is that an assistance animal is not protected in public accommodations, but they are protected under the Fair Housing Act and the Rehabilitation Act. So they should have access into housing, right? But not public places like stores, restaurants, healthcare facilities, etc. So that's the key difference. And then the last category on here, we're going to get a lot more into detail on this in upcoming slides, but the last category here is pets. And a pet, right, doesn't play any specific role in helping someone to cope with a disability or condition. Their primary role is companionship, and there's no special access. Even if you're a person with a disability, right, if your pet is qualified, if your animal is qualified as a pet, there's no special access for public accommodations or housing. Okay, so we can move on to the next slide. So we'll talk a little bit about reasonable accommodations. So the link here at the top of this document is a good overview resource by one of the CT legal services providers to help people just understand the basics of what a reasonable accommodation is and what people with disabilities' rights are to request a reasonable accommodation. And then the resources at the bottom of this slide are a HUD notice that's specific to requests for animals as a reasonable accommodation, and then a really good interactive tool that we'll talk more about in a minute. So a reasonable accommodation basically is a request that somebody with a disability makes for something that's different than the usual protocol, right, in their housing or in a shelter or other kind of program, because they need something different in order to live in that housing or reside in that shelter or participate in that program because of their disability, right? So an example is, and this is probably the one that you guys are dealing with most commonly, a client wants an exception to a no pet policy that a landlord has because they have a bird, let's say, and that bird alleviates the symptoms of their depression, right? So that's an assistance animal. And the thing to keep in mind about reasonable accommodation requests is that the person absolutely has the right to make the request, right? And the landlord has the responsibility to respond to that request, but does not necessarily in every case have to say yes to the request. And we'll go through what the exceptions are. And again, all of this is very case by case. So the allowable reasons that a landlord can deny a request for a reasonable accommodation are because the person has not provided information that supports, so this is the first reason, the person has not provided information that supports that they have a disability, right? So if that disability is not observable, so for example, an observable disability would be someone's in a wheelchair or someone's using a walker, someone's blind and uses a cane to walk, right? That's an observable disability. If it's not an observable disability, and the landlord is most likely and entitled, right, to request proof of the disability, right? And if the person doesn't provide that supporting information, then the landlord can deny the request. Now, I'm sure, many of you who have worked with clients that have animals have experienced somebody going online, right, and purchasing a certificate or some sort of registration off the internet that says that their animal is an assistance animal, and they think that with that certificate of registration, opens the door and they're allowed to take that animal in whatever kind of housing they want. And that is not the case, right? So HUD has explicitly in the notice that's linked at the bottom of this slide said that such a certificate is not recognized as a reliable source of information confirming a disability. So we'll talk in a minute about how to submit documentation of a disability that will be reliable. The second reason why a landlord can legally deny a request is because the animal constitutes a direct threat to the health or safety of others, right? So the classic example here is a dog that the landlord is claiming is dangerous, right? So, so if, for example, you've got a dog that has maybe a history of having bitten people, is known to DOH, or the Department of Health, as an animal with a bite history, that animal is showing aggression, the owner's not able to control the dog on leash, right? That landlord would be on very solid grounds to deny a reasonable accommodation request to have that dog in the housing. Now, what they can't do is just establish a policy that says all pit bulls are aggressive and dangerous, therefore we do not accept pit bulls, right? That is not allowed under the HUD rule down below. And then also the rule says that if the owner can take steps to eliminate or reduce the threat, right, then the landlord should consider that in whether or not they can deny the request. So the classic example there, and I know that muzzles are very controversial among animal welfare folks, but a muzzle would be a classic example, right? If the person says, I'm going to muzzle the dog, the muzzle is going to be the dog is always going to be muzzled when they're outside of my unit on the property. That is something that the landlord is required to consider when determining whether or not they're legally obligated to approve their request. And then the third most common reason is because the animal would pose an undue financial burden. And usually we see that where it's an insurance issue, right? The landlord says, my insurer is going to increase my premiums, double my premiums, because it's a Rottweiler or a Pit Bull or any of the Cane Corso, right? Any of the breeds that are often targeted by breed-specific policies. So the landlord, though they can't make an argument based on safety that is an umbrella argument based on breed, they may have an argument if it's an insurance issue and the insurance company is gonna raise the insurance rates based on a breed. So a couple other things to keep in mind here. It is possible to request a reasonable accommodation for more than one animal in a household. It's going to be hard, I think, to get those requests approved. And the requests would, so for example, if there are two people in the household, each of them have a disability and each of them are making a request, that might be a scenario. Or if one person with a disability has multiple animals and each of the animals provides, alleviates some sort of, one animal is helping to, with symptoms of PTSD and the other one is helping with symptoms of depression, that's another way where you might be able to make a case for multiple assistance animals within the same household. Okay, next slide. So
I just think the fees thing before you go on, I think the fees thing is more important to call out, even though I know everyone read this slide, but because I think this is where they try to make a real barrier with homeless people of saying there's a pet fee. So I ended up advancing it, but there it is.
Thank you. No, I missed that. So thank you. So it's not just fees, right? It's also deposits, right? They may not charge a pet fee. They may not add an additional deposit, and they also can't charge higher rent, right, for service or assistance animals, because that's a thing you see sometimes. Okay, next slide. So technically, these requests do not need to be made in writing. Although I think in most circumstances, you're going to need to make the request in writing in order to make progress with the request to get the landlord to approve it. And in most cases, they're not allowed to ask for documentation of the disability if it's an observable disability. But in most cases, you're going to have to provide documentation of the disability. And the documentation is going to have to demonstrate two things, right? It's not enough to say, I have a disability and I have a dog. So because I have a disability, I want to bring the dog with me. That's not sufficient, right? You've got the documentation needs to demonstrate both that the person has a disability and that they need the animal because it provides assistance or support or performs a task that is necessary because of the disability. And the rules for documenting the disability, I think most of you are probably familiar with the disability verification requirements for permanent supportive housing, right? It's the same rules. So the documentation can come from the documentation of the disability, right? Can be the person is getting federal disability benefits, either Social Security, SSI, SSD, or VA disability benefits. So that's a way to document that they're disabled. Or it can be a letter from a professional who's licensed to diagnose or treat the disability. So it can be a physician, a psychiatrist, a social worker, a nurse practitioner, etc. Right? So any medical or mental health professional that's licensed to diagnose and treat the disability. The landlord cannot require medical records, right? They cannot require a specific diagnosis. You do not have to disclose the specific diagnosis. They can't ask for details about the disability. They can't say, oh, here's this 20-page packet that you've got to fill out in order to request a reasonable accommodation. They can't require a statement to be notarized. None of that is allowable under the HUD guidance. And all of this is laid out by HUD themselves in the document that's linked on the previous slide, which can be a really good advocacy resource as you work with landlords. So again, the accommodation, they're not necessarily going to be required to grant the accommodation, but they are required to make a good faith response. So they have to consider the circumstances of the particular case and make a good faith response. And we went through the reasons that they can deny. Another thing to keep in mind is that how big the landlord is going to matter here, right? So generally, HUD is going to expect that a larger landlord will make more changes than a smaller mom and pop landlord, right? So if you're working with somebody that needs a reasonable accommodation in order to stay together with their pets, you might want to think about, are there larger landlords in your community as you're doing housing search with people. Now, all of this is to say, I know that actually getting these letters can be very challenging, right? I think a lot of professionals are hesitant to give these letters, and we're going to go through what the letter should say in just a minute. So they can't limit the breed we talked about already. They can't say, oh, we only do reasonable accommodations for dogs that weigh less than 20 pounds, right? None of that is allowable. And again, they've got to consider the specific, if they're making a direct threat argument, right? The dog is unsafe, then they can only consider the specifics of that particular dog, not the breed. And they've got to consider efforts that the owner could make to eliminate or reduce any threat that they're claiming that there is. So we'll talk about advocacy on the next slide. So I'll skip that. So we're gonna do, before we move on to the poll, are there questions on this? No? All right. let's do the
You're very
poll.
clear, Lauren.
So Suzanne's going to launch the poll. In case anybody's not on the screen and can't see it, I'm going to read what it is. So this is Adam, and this is his beautiful baby Rocco. And they've been together on the streets for 6 months. You've been able to work with Adam. You found a great apartment for him in a 50-unit building owned by a landlord that has multiple properties. The building doesn't allow pets, and Adam is making a reasonable accommodation request. So you have a social worker that's written a letter saying that he provides disability-related services to Adam, that Rocco is an assistance animal and is needed by Adam to alleviate multiple symptoms of his disability. So the poll questions are: can the landlord require Adam to submit medical records substantiating what the social worker has put in the letter? Can the landlord require Adam to get a smaller dog instead of Rocco? And can the landlord decline the request because a dog similar to Rocco bit someone in one of their buildings?
So the poll should be up now.
Yep.
All polls are anonymous, so don't be shy and worried about giving the wrong answer. We're not going to know anything.
So we'll give you guys a few minutes to get your answers in here.
Yeah, I'll give it to a minute, another few seconds. Okay. I know everyone's dying for the answers. So I should be showing the results. Lauren, I know sometimes when you're a co-host, it's weird, but
Yeah, I can't see them, but I take your word for it. So the answer to number one, so the first question is, can the landlord require medical records? And the answer to that is no. The landlord cannot require medical records, right? Those are confidential records. There's no reason for Adam to have to put all of his business out there to the landlord. So the letter from the social worker is the only documentation that's sufficient documentation to establish that Adam has a disability. So the second question, can the landlord require Adam to get a smaller dog instead? And yep, you guys got that one all right. The answer to that is no. The landlord can't say, well, we'd take a smaller dog, but we're not going to take Rocco. The third question, can the landlord decline the request because a dog similar to Rocco bit someone in one of their buildings? And the answer to that is also no. So if they're going to make a determination that's related to safety, right, they can only make that determination based upon Rocco, right, based upon this specific animal. They can't say, oh, we had a bad experience 6 months ago, so we're going to decline this. They have to make an argument that Rocco specifically is dangerous and cannot be properly managed sufficiently to reduce that risk by the owner. So all three questions here are no. Now we'll talk about advocacy in a minute, right? Just because legally the answer to these questions is no doesn't mean that you're not going to encounter it, and the landlord's going to, and you're going to find landlords who are doing all of these things and other things that are prohibited under the law. So this slide goes through when you're helping people to get a letter, what should be included in that letter. So
and
again,
if you have licensed social workers in your agency or counselors or psychiatrists or medical professionals who can write the letter, they can write that letter, right? So you don't have to, if you have professionals on staff, they can be the source of the letter. You don't have to go to like a special person if you have that resource. I know not everybody does, but some of you, I think based on which agencies are here, I think some might have resources internally. Because I think that's another question we get a lot is like, well, you mean I'm a social worker and I'm a social worker, I'm a licensed social worker. I technically could write this for someone. Um, which I did ask a question about that because someone asked me to write them a letter. So that's how I found that out. Just saying. Sorry, Lauren.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Thank you, Suzanne, for raising it. The thing to keep in mind is that the person writing the letter has to be licensed to diagnose and treat the disability, right? So if you're a licensed clinical social worker, right, you're not going to write a letter about cancer, right? You're not going to write a letter about HIV, right? So, but for behavioral health disabilities, mental health, addiction, right, a licensed clinical social worker absolutely can write the letter. For a medical condition, you'll need a medical professional. So you want to include obviously the client's name. You want to, a statement, and this is a best practice, right? Statement that the person writing the letter is providing healthcare or disability related services to the client, and the client's disability substantially limits at least one major life activity or major bodily function, right? That's the definition of disability that applies for these reasonable accommodation requests. You don't have to give any more detail. You don't have to say what the disability is. You're going to say, the type of animal, and that the client needs that animal because it provides assistance or performs a task that the person needs because of the disability, or it provides emotional support to alleviate a symptom or effect of the disability. And then you want to have that person sign it, put their name on it, their license number, and date the letter. And again, you don't have to go into more detail about, what specific task the person is the animal is gonna perform, or what specific symptom that they're gonna alleviate. All right. We have any questions? All right. So advocacy. So like I said, right, this is the law, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that landlords know the law, or they may know the law and they may not care, right? So you are most likely going to have to do a lot of advocacy, both, if you don't have an internal resource to get the letters, in order to get the letters, and then also to help the landlords to understand what their legal obligations are. And back on the first slide in this series, there was a link at the bottom of the slide to an interactive web-based tool that HUD has made available. And it's a really good advocacy resource. Suzanne's going back to it. It's that second tool right there. Yep. It's a really good resource because what it does is it walks you through a series of questions, right? Is it a dog? Is it a mini horse, right? Does the person have a disability? Is there an undue financial burden? And at the end of the day, it's almost like it's a web-based decision tree is what it really is. And it leads to, in a lot of cases, yes, this reasonable accommodation should be approved. So it's a good advocacy tool to introduce to your landlords as they are probably denying these requests for all sorts of reasons and they're on very shaky legal ground. So helping the landlords to understand their legal obligations, and also helping the landlords to understand, right, that, keeping the family intact, right, helps to support stable tenancy. The more trauma and the more disruption and heartbreak that people have in their lives, the harder it is for them to be stable tenants. And then really partnering with whomever is going to be providing ongoing services after the person is housed and no longer part of your outreach team to explain that those services are really going to be holistic services for the whole family, including the people and the pets, and that you're going to be there, not necessarily you as an outreach worker, but the case manager in the permanent supportive housing program or the rapid rehousing program is going to be there to help the person, navigate, and to help them, follow their lease and be a good pet owner. Probably the more compelling argument for most of your landlords is going to be, is their legal exposure, right? And so we've linked here on this slide to a settlement for $115,000 that was paid out by a landlord to a Connecticut family because the landlord refused to make an exception to a no pets policy for a disabled tenant that needed an assistance dog, right? So not complying with these legal requirements can be costly for landlords. And as is always the case, right? That interactive web tool also can be a good tool with your clients, right? To help them to understand, because I think sometimes clients think that they've got a reasonable accommodation request that's not going to pass muster, right? But when you're working with someone that really does probably have a solid reasonable accommodation argument, and they've done all the right things to document that, and the landlord is still saying no, and the landlord's reasoning to say no doesn't seem solid, and you've done the advocacy with the landlord and it's not working, always consider whether or not a referral to one of your legal services partners is in order. And the link to CT Law Help, which I'm sure you are all familiar, is here on this slide. Now, I know, again, legal services providers are also overwhelmed, and so it may be hard for people to connect with those resources, but we should always be trying to make those connections. All right. And then lastly, again, service animals and support or assistance animals, depending on which term you're using, are protected under the Fair Housing Act. And the Fair Housing Act remains the law of the land, despite whatever recent news you've been seeing in the media coming out of the Trump administration. The Fair Housing Act stands. I checked this morning. These links are still live. So if you think that someone's fair housing rights have been violated, you can make a report to HUD. Also know that Connecticut law at the state level, even if the feds do anything to dismantle the Fair Housing Act, which has not happened yet, that Connecticut does have state level anti-discrimination laws that protect people with disabilities. So a lot of this stuff people are going to be protected on regardless of what happens at the federal level. And there's also a way for you to make a complaint to the CT Commission on Human Rights if someone's fair housing rights are being violated. All right. Turn it back over to Suzanne, I think.
Okay, I'll quickly pick it up. Yep, it's on my list. Okay, so here we're not going to break out because we only have we have 8 minutes left, and we'd like to give you at least 1 minute back out of those 8. But we'll see if we actually achieve that goal. But just let's have a quick large group discussion about this. Susan is living in her car with 5 cats. You suspect that she has a mental health disability, but she doesn't acknowledge that. She has an online certificate saying the cats are assistance animals, and she thinks that's enough to get a reasonable accommodation. She's struggling to feed the cats, and she's heartbroken that one seems sick. So this isn't just about reasonable accommodation. This is about the whole session, thinking about all the things we've been talking about today is what next steps might you take that would be helpful to Susan? You could shout out, you could put it in the chat. Of course, I guess those are the 2 options. Anybody have any food to get her cats fed? How about we start there? Maybe get her some resources. Yes? She's struggling to feed the cats. All right, well, I'm going to do that. I'm going to try and get her some free cat food. That's what I'm going to do. What's anybody else going to do? Everybody's very quiet. I know it's the end of the time.
Tiffany
Someone
had a
has,
suggestion.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed it.
Foster. Look for a foster was Tiffany's suggestion.
Okay. Well, that may be something to explore with her if she'd consider that. That's a good one. We'd have to see if she would be open to that. And then trying to keep all five together might be another challenge with that we would want to think about for her. Do we have any health care we can maybe, because she thinks one of the cats is sick too. That might be another way to engage her. Um, other thoughts on her? I think we want to help her get a proper letter, right? So one thing we know is that those online certificates are not, that's not enough. It's not enough anywhere anymore. Everybody's kind of tightened up. Even the airlines, I think people use those a lot to get their pets on the airline for free. I think a niece of mine might have done that. But everybody's tightened that up. And so the certificate's not enough, but we can explain to her what is required. And if we had the resource internally, we could connect her, or if not, we could connect her hopefully with a professional. Um, if she thinks she's going to get a reasonable accommodation, she already has in some way identified that she needs an accommodation, right? So reasonable accommodations are made for people with disabilities. She may not agree that she has a mental health disability. So I'm getting all into Susan here, using up all my time. But I think we also need to know a little bit more about Susan. But if she's thinking she's getting a reasonable accommodation, there's a reason there. So she may identify something as the need that the animals are helping her with, and we want to start there. I think that's the other thing is we want to start where Susan is. And Susan's worried about feeding them, the cat that's sick, and getting a reasonable accommodation. So hopefully we can take a look at those things. I'm rushing, but is there anything else anybody else wants to quickly suggest? Okay. We also might want to see it's winter now too, if she has gas in the car so she can keep warm. That's just a sidebar. Me getting over involved in the case. So now you know what I was like when I was a case manager. All right. Now I'm going to be the rush trainer and say, I think we've already rung a lot of these bells about pets is that pets are companions. They make people healthier. They increase your good chemicals and decrease your bad chemicals, which that's a great thing. And a lot of people have different relationships with their animals, and there's a wide range of the ways and relations that people have. So we want to be sensitive to that. And that helping people keep their pets. And if you go to My Dog is My Home website, there's many videos of people talking about their pets. And a fellow who was homeless for years on streets around the country finally got to New York and was able to get a street vet, and a street outreach team to put it all together and get him into supportive housing with his dog Coffee. And it's I mean, he never ever accepted housing for years, 8 years, 9 years. He lived on the streets with his dog. And hopefully you can get some support from your supervisors in your programs. Share this video, I mean, the slides, share the recording with them, and definitely check out the resources. The thing on the right, the picture on the right is from My Dog is My Home, where they envision equitable access for all families, regardless of their composition. I want to point out just one thing is a lot of the work comes out of, and a lot of the political will about victims of domestic violence having to stay with their abusers because they wouldn't leave their pet, right? And so there's big, just to connect that into the homeless world, because obviously when you leave your abusive partner, you're often in an unstable housing situation. And that's kind of a lot of the impetus for a lot of the work, but it's now spread, and My Dog is My Home is really integrated into the homeless space a lot as well. But a lot of the resources, there's some great trauma resources that better than things I've seen in a lot of other cases. So that's my final segue to these additional resources. Lauren mentioned some of these. This is a great one where you can look by city, state, or zip code. financially friendly pet resources. There's just a lot of stuff out there. And then My Dog is My Home. There's links to their website, to lots of resources that they provide. Scrolling through. This is really should have been number one, a sample pets policy for your program. Some of you run shelters or know people who run shelters. There's an owner acknowledgement policy, there's a pet supplies needs assessment, and then there's a lease addendum, which I think is a great tool. If supportive housing providers start accepting pets, there's a sample. A great tool for them to start moving along by having, because there's not no rules, right? There's rules attached and, becomes uh, part of the lease signing process, as well as registering your pet with the building. You usually have to have them spayed and provide that resource as well. Purple Light Leash Project resources for DV shelters. Okay, and then there's our recordings of the first three sessions. If you missed those we may have mentioned a pet once or twice, but those are really talking about the main roles of outreach workers and housing stabilization supports and services and helping people integrate into housing. So upcoming resources for you. I did not give you a minute back, but there's a change in time for the second session for the supervisors because it was booked for Lincoln's birthday, which is a holiday for state employees. So it's 2/5 and 2/19. And then we'll also have an agency session that will be scheduled. Communities of practice. The next one is February 13th. Andrea White's here today. She's the facilitator of those. That's really a chance to talk about all sorts of challenges that come up in the work. And then March, put this in your calendar, the next quarterly outreach meeting is March 19th. And there's lots of resources and there's our contact information. So we're going to stop recording. We're going to stop the share.